Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Fantasy Edge. I am your host, Joe Marino. We've got producer Todd on the controls. Todd, how you doing today?
I am outstanding, Joe. Outstanding. So much to look forward to, so much to talk about. Well, I don't even know where you're going to begin tonight, Joe.
Yes, there's lots of stuff going on around the NFL. Week 10 is just about done. We're recording this episode about an hour or two before the Monday night football game between the LA Rams and the Miami Dolphins. So when we're going over the stats and everything, if you don't see Devon Achane, Tyreek Hill, Puka Nakua, that is why. So little disclaimer there. But yes, very eventful weekend of games. Todd, I assume you're pretty hyped because your Baltimore Ravens had a very exhilarating win over the Cincinnati Bengals.
Well, no question, a divisional win, plus it's two wins back to back on a very short week. So for us to get out of that with the mini bye going into the Pittsburgh game, which is this Sunday at Pittsburgh, yeah, it does help to have a couple of extra days off and plus to be able to rack up those wins. But bottom line is though, and I know you're going to talk about it. The pass defense for the Baltimore Ravens is just atrocious right now. Really needs to be corrected. Once that gets corrected, then obviously you're looking at a Super Bowl team.
For sure. I just want to say one thing about the Ravens. Those jerseys that they wore, beautiful. I really, really liked it. Just a great jersey matchup overall on that Thursday.
Outstanding. I will send you a Lamar Jackson signed purple jersey.
Yeah, we'll frame it, put it in the background.
There
That's
you go.
okay. All right. So now we're gonna get into the meat and potatoes here. News around the league, injury updates. First and foremost, bye weeks going into week 11. There are four teams that are off this week: the Arizona Cardinals, Carolina Panthers, New York Giants, and the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. So if you're staying on top of everything, you've already got a plan set in place for this coming week, preparing for some pretty key players outside of Panthers guys, at least, that will not be in your fantasy lineup. So news and notes around the NFL by position. We're going to start with quarterbacks. NFL Network's Ian Rappaport reporting that Dak Prescott is seeking a second opinion on whether or not he should have a surgery on his injured hamstring. It sounds like whether he has the surgery or not, he is going to miss the remainder of the season. And speaking of the Cowboys coach Mike McCarthy saying that Cooper Rush will start again for Dallas against the Houston Texans in week 11. He also did note that the Cowboys should be signing a third quarterback, and they are not, quote, not there yet on Trey Lance becoming the starter. If you watched that game for the Cowboys, just a tire fire of performance by Cooper Rush and the whole entire Cowboys offense. And to add insult to injury, the the way that the arena or the stadium rather is built in Dallas, there's like a big skylight. Todd, I don't know if you saw this, but on one of the plays, CD Lamb was getting ready to catch a touchdown pass and was being blinded by the sun. And Cowboys owner Jerry Jones was not very thrilled with being questioned about it after the game. So
Yeah, I did, and that is typical though of that Dallas stadium. As big as it is, they do have that opening in the middle of the roof. It actually goes back to the original Dallas stadium when it was the exact same lineup, design, and they keep it open. It's not the entire roof, and it's obviously not a roof that's closed entirely, but on that slight opening, and not to mention the fact this time of year with the sun shining at that angle, yeah, it got into Lamb's eyes, and yeah, it wasn't good.
yeah, so very rough performance. Obviously, when Cooper Rush came in relief for Dak Prescott a couple of years ago when he missed some time, played okay, but this time around not so much. I wouldn't be surprised if we see some Trey Lance down the stretch here in Dallas. Over to New York, Giants head coach Brian Daboll saying the team is, quote, evaluating things when asked about if Daniel Jones will remain the starter after their week 11 bye. Drew Lock is the backup there. So keep that in mind with Malik Neighbors. So I am a Malik Neighbors fantasy owner, so I'm crossing my fingers that Drew Lock is starting going forward because watching Daniel Jones, it's extremely frustrating. And I'm sure you all are with me there. Over in Carolina, Panthers head coach Dave Canales would not commit to a starting quarterback for week 12 after their bye. Bryce Young just coming off of a win in Germany over the New York Giants. And then Jaguars head coach Doug Peterson said nothing definitive on whether Trevor Lawrence will play on Sunday or not. I'm going to assume that Lawrence will be out. It sounds like it is a pretty severe injury here, but we'll see. Mac Jones was pretty abysmal in this past week, in week 10. And then Bears head coach Matt Eberflus says Caleb Williams is our starter when asked if he would consider benching him. That's not really a surprise at all, although the Bears offense has also been very abysmal the last couple of weeks. And then last quarterback note, Browns head coach Kevin Stefanski saying that Jameis Winston will continue to be the team's QB1 heading into week 11 against the Saints. Lots of quarterback notes. Now on to the running backs. Broncos head coach Sean Payton said Audric Estime will continue to get more reps. It's a pretty similar thing to last week, although we actually did see an increased amount of reps for Estime. He had the majority of the carries for the Broncos. Packers rookie running back Marshawn Lloyd is expected to practice this week. He's been on IR, missing most of the season so far. Definitely an exciting rookie. Definitely someone to monitor because Josh Jacobs has been getting the lion's share of carries for the Packers. And if, God forbid, he goes down, I think Marshawn Lloyd could be someone of importance going into the fantasy playoffs. Over to the Baltimore Ravens, their head coach John Harbaugh says that the team hopes to get Keaton Mitchell more involved with the offense going forward. We talked a little bit about Keaton Mitchell last week. I don't think he's going to have much of an impact on this offense unless, like Josh Jacobs, we were talking about a little earlier, if God forbid Derrick Henry goes down, maybe Keaton Mitchell will have some fantasy relevance. And then, interesting note here, the Cincinnati Bengals worked out running back Leonard Fournette today. Who knows if he's going to get signed? The Bengals did trade for running back Khalil Herbert for the NFL trade deadline last week. So we'll see if he gets a contract there, although Chase Brown has been phenomenal for the Bengals. Over to the wide receivers. Buffalo Bills head coach Sean McDermott said Keon Coleman will not play in week 11 in the huge matchup against the Kansas City Chiefs. Coleman has a wrist injury, and he was also sidelined in week 10 against the Indianapolis Colts. Bengals head coach Zach Taylor says
Hold it, back up, Joe. What about Cooper? What's going on with him? Because he's been out, and this guy that you guys just traded for him, and he's still sitting on the sidelines.
Yeah, so he was out against the Colts, and last I saw, he's going to be questionable. I'm assuming they're hopeful that he'll be out there against the Chiefs. They're going to need him, that's for sure. And Dalton Kincaid exited the game early too, so they may be very banged up going into Kansas against the Kansas City Chiefs here. So hopefully Cooper will be out there, but we shall see.
All right.
All right. Now over to Cincinnati. T. Higgins, quote unquote, day to day heading into the week. He's got a quad injury. I'm not going to hold my breath here. Until we see him out on that field, I'll believe he's going to be playing. And then Saints interim head coach Darren Rizzi says Chris Olave is not ruled out for the rest of the year with concussion. I'm gonna go on a limb here and say he's gonna miss the rest of the season. 2 concussions in 1 year. He's had multiple throughout his very short career here, even going back to his college days too. Gotta look out for your own health here. So, and it's a lost season for the Saints. You gotta imagine that Olave will be out for the rest of the year, but we shall see. And then another note on the Baltimore Ravens, Deontay Johnson. He's had limited usage here, and John Harbaugh says He's been here now for somewhat of a number of practices. I would expect him to ramp up. So we could,
Deontay.
yeah, we could see some more Deontay Johnson for the Baltimore Ravens. And then we already talked about Dalton Kincaid for the tight ends. And if you were watching Sunday Night Football, Sam Laporta did go down with a shoulder injury. Their head coach, Dan Campbell, says that he's hopeful that he'll be out there week 11 against the Titans. All right. That is,
And that Deontay is not to be confused with creative producer Dante. Is that correct?
yes, that is correct.
Okay,
We
just make
give
it
a shout
sure.
out to our creative producer, Dante, who did all the editing on our first episode. So shout out to Dante.
Shout
Dude.
out.
All right, that's the news and notes around the NFL for the fantasy relevant players. We're going to go into a quick break and we'll be back with the top performers for week 10. All right, welcome back to the Fantasy Edge. I'm Joe Marino. We have producer Todd on the controls.
That's
Now
right.
you the top performers for week 10, starting with the quarterbacks. Number one on the week, Joe Burrow. Phenomenal week in a loss to the Baltimore Ravens. He put up 38 fantasy points on the week. Number two, his opponent, Lamar Jackson, 35.8 fantasy points. So your Baltimore Ravens quarterback, producer Todd, had a
Yeah,
very good.
he's the best. I mean, there's no doubt about it. He's won two MVPs already. This is his best year that he's ever had, and for a number of reasons. Obviously, I mean, the Ravens have had strong running backs, but not of Derrick Henry's caliber. So that's completely opening up the passing game, and with great wide receivers, especially with Zay Flowers. And yeah, Mark Andrews, obviously, there he has a lot of weapons right now. So, I saw an interesting stat, Joe. When the Ravens are scoring 25 or more points, we're 7-0. When we score less, we're 0-3. 7-3 is the record right now. So the magic number is 25. So you have to think, what does that mean for Lamar with his fantasy points if that's the goal for the team?
Yeah, and he wasn't QB1 on the week, but he got the win for the Ravens. So that
Hell
is
yeah.
an important thing in their Super Bowl chase. Number three on the week, Jalen Hurts. They're bringing the tush push back. He had another one this past week, 32.7 points for him. Kyler Murray, good bounce back week for him. That just throttled the New York Jets, 31.4 for week 10 for him. I was facing Kyler this past week. I do have him in some of my leagues, but the main league I was facing him. So he kind of killed my chances this week. And then rounding out the top five, Brock Purdy, 27.3 for him. So that's rounding out the top five. On to the running backs, Bijan Robinson, 29.4. A little bit of a lower scoring running back week for week 10. But Bijan, he's looking like what everything you wanted him to be when you drafted him. He has been great the last couple of weeks, ramping up 29.4 points for him. Chuba Hubbard, 24.9 in that Germany game. He has been phenomenal all season long. Probably one of the better draft picks from this past year for the Carolina Panthers. A bright spot for him, and he just got rewarded with a contract extension. So good on Chuba. Number three on the week, Chase Brown, 22.4 points. Zach Moss out for the rest of the year. They're bringing in Khalil Herbert, potentially Leonard Fournette, but I don't think that's going to stop Chase Brown from dominating this backfield going forward. He's number three on the week. Number four, James Conner. He's going to be a consistent presence in the top of the running back rankings the rest of the year. The Arizona Cardinals offense runs through James Conner, no pun intended. He has been fantastic this whole entire season from wire to wire. And he's been, knock on wood, he's been healthy, which is not something that you can really say about him for all of his career. He's been hurt just about every single year he's been in the league. So either it's a good story, he's healthy, or you're waiting for that shoe to drop. But that remains to be seen. And then rounding out the top five for the running backs, we have Rachaad White. I believe it's 3 weeks in a row with a touchdown for him going into the bye week. He ends with 19 points. Uh, Consistent pass catcher for Rachaad White. Bucky Irving, he is proving that you can start both of them. So I like Rachaad White. I like Bucky Irving. And that Sean Tucker hype from a few weeks ago doesn't seem like it is really affecting either. Over the wide receivers, Ja'Marr Chase, 55.4 fantasy points. What can you say? He's been the best wide receiver in fantasy football this year. Even with a slow start, he is still just dominating out there. Him and Joe Burrow have a magnificent connection. Uh, if you
And they
have,
still won't give him his money.
yeah, he's going to bankrupt the Bengals for God's sake.
I mean, that's ridiculous.
And if they don't, somebody else will. If you had the Joe Burrow and Ja'Marr Chase stack, congratulations on your win. And if you did and you lost, I would love to see the matchup because, man, I know in my main league, those guys combined for almost 100 points. So that's an automatic win. Number two for wide receivers, Marquez Valdes-Scantling, released by the Bills last month, and he lands with the New Orleans Saints. Fantastic, 25.9 fantasy points on the week, a couple of touchdowns. Um, you're probably wondering, should I pick up Marquez Valdes-Scantling? I don't think you can rely on him, but if you're in the need of a pinch flex play, you got some guys on bye this week, I guess it can't hurt. They really don't have any weapons on offense for them, and they get the new fired coach bump too. So, hey, if you need a flex play, like you could probably do worse than MVS here, but if you got to rely on him, you're probably in trouble. Calvin Ridley, number three, 25.4 fantasy points. That Titans team is going to be down. They're going to have to sling the ball quite a bit. Even with Will Levis back under center for the Titans, Ridley is still doing well. So no Hopkins anymore. Ridley is going to be a very key fantasy producer going down here. Number four, George Pickens, 20 and a half points. Pickens doing very well with Russell Wilson as the quarterback, as expected. And then number five, we got another Baltimore Raven, Tylan Wallace. I've never heard of this guy. He also had 20 and a half fantasy points, that big touchdown for the Ravens. Todd, what do you know about this guy?
So this guy had one big play last year. It was when the Ravens played the Rams. The game was in Baltimore, and the game went into overtime. And the Rams had the ball first in overtime and had to punt. And Wallace, I don't know if you remember the game, but Wallace returned that punt for a touchdown, and the Ravens won the game. It was a very exciting game. And this guy Wallace, I think that was his only play in the NFL. Then all of a sudden, he shows up against the Bengals and he's laying it up. And he had that one play where I forget, it was something like 70 something yards, that run. He was just tiptoeing down the line. And yeah, and the guy's an MVP all of a sudden. So how about that?
Yeah, top five, good for him. I wouldn't be picking this guy up, but if we see it again this next week, maybe. So stay tuned on that. Maybe we'll be talking about Mr. Wallace again going forward.
Well, realistically, for the audience, and if you are making picks, he's probably not one of those guys that's going to get a lot of playing time. He's more like a utility player. They put him in there at certain times. He's obviously on special teams, but I mean, he has good hands, but he's not. There's so many other weapons on that team, especially when we're playing Pittsburgh, where you have such a grind. The running game. You're just going to grind it out. It's going to be a typical AFC North matchup. Not exactly, and maybe Wallace gets in for a few plays, but doubtful he's going to have 20 points again.
Yeah, I agree with you there. It's going to be a Derrick Henry game, that's for sure, or
Yeah.
Justice Hill. So over to the tight ends now. Travis Kelce, 20.4 points. Ever since Rashee Rice went down with that season-ending injury, it has been vintage Travis Kelce here. He has been the number one option in that Kansas City offense once again, just like old times. Speaking of old times, top two, Mark Andrews, 18.8 fantasy points, one of the best weeks fantasy-wise for him on the season. He had a touchdown. Uh, he's been trending upwards, and Isaiah Likely missed last week with an injury. So with no Likely out there, I think Andrews, if for some reason you got two tight ends and you've been bouncing back and forth, I know some people have been in my league. Someone has Cade Otton. Otton's been phenomenal as well. But if you drafted Andrews, most likely you have another tight end because of how disappointing he was early on. So I think you got to start Andrews going forward. He's just been too good to pass up here. Number 3, last week we were talking about Mike Gesicki being a must start. Tanner Hudson is actually the Bengals tight end that ended up being the must start, I guess you could say. He ended up with 16.3 points. He had a touchdown against the Ravens. Hudson, I don't know. I don't think you can rely on him. I still would go with Mike Gesicki if you had to go between the two, but Hudson's not going away, it looks like. Number 4, Sam Laporta, despite getting that injury, 15.6 points. And then number 5, TJ Hawkinson, a good story. His second game back with the Minnesota Vikings, 15.2 fantasy points. If you've been holding on to Hawkinson, worth the wait. I think he's going to be very good going forward. All right, those were the top performers for Week 10. And now we're going to get into the listener questions. Want to let you guys know that you can write in your questions. Our email is thefantasyedgeccm@gmail.com if you want to get those questions in, if you need fantasy advice, anything, opinions on your lineup, start sits, send it in. We'd be happy to look at it for you and read it on the show. We do have one question here, and Todd, feel free to...
Yeah, we did get the one question, actually. This is from a Jeremy Z in Cleveland, Ohio. I don't know what kind of a name Jeremy Z is, but anyway, he writes, quote, "Hey guys, love the first episode of the show." We've got a fan. We got a fan, Joe. That's big. I had a question that I hope you could address on the next episode. I was wondering what your thoughts on vetoing trades were. The trade deadline for my league is coming up, and I'm in a league where vetoes are a common thing. Thanks, and keep up the good work.
Thank you so much, Jeremy in Cleveland. Very nice to we've already got a fan early on.
Yes.
Veto trades. I am very passionate about this. I am very anti-vetoing trades. Unless you can prove that there is collusion, like if you're trading Tajay Spears for Christian McCaffrey and like it just doesn't make any sense at all, then yeah, go ahead and veto it. I think that commissioner vetoing should be on. But if you have voting on trades, 9 times out of 10, I think if a trade is vetoed, you just have a group of guys that are salty that they couldn't trade for the guy that was moved. If 2 people can come together, agree on a trade, who are you to say that they can't let that happen? So let trades happen. If people are allowed to make good trades, people are allowed to make bad trades. You shouldn't be punished for being good at making trades. Sorry, not sorry. That's my opinion. What do you think, Todd? What do you think about vetoing trades?
Well, I agree with you, Joe. I mean, what's the point? And you're right. You have to prove collusion amongst the players, and we don't always see that. It's very tough to prove that unless you have very specific, concrete evidence. So, yeah, I'm not a big fan of the veto either. And I am curious, though, for fans out there, if they could let us know. I would love to do a short survey on this going up to maybe the next episode this week or even next week's episode. And if they could let us know if they are in a league and what their thoughts are on the vetoing. I'd be really interested. I'd be very interested to hear what the audience has to say about it.
Yes, thank you for that question, Jeremy in Cleveland. Appreciate this early on support here. So That's going to do it for this episode of the Fantasy Edge. Producer Todd, do we got another show coming up this week?
We sure do. We have another great show coming up because, what's cool about it is that we're going to be able to get into what Week 11 is really going to look like, the matchups. We also might even talk on some other subjects, perhaps hockey. That's something we should probably maybe address, maybe just for a few minutes as well. There's so many great things to look forward to, Joe, with the Fantasy Edge that I think the audience is going to get a lot out of it, and they definitely want to stay tuned.
Absolutely. So we will be recording in a couple of days for the next episode. So stay tuned for that. We're going to get into the Week 11 matchups, start sits. Going forward, the Monday recording episodes, we're going to get into the recap of the previous week, top performers, news and notes, and then the other episodes throughout the week kind of preview, more advice-based content. So stay tuned for that. Still a work in progress here, but we're going to help each and every one of you compete for that championship in the coming weeks. So as always, I'm Joe Marino. We got producer Todd, Dante, the content producer as well. Thank you all for watching. Thank you for listening, and we will see you in the next one.